Welcome to the Petrichor Marching Arts Podcast, where we talk all things marching arts. My name's Bryson Teel. I'm a songwriter, composer, and mixing engineer, teaching and designing for drum corps, marching bands, and indoor percussion groups on the East Coast, as well as my mainstay school, Newtown High School in Connecticut. I'm sitting down with performers, educators, and creators to discuss perspectives on the activity, to see where it's at now and where it's headed in the future. On today's episode, I'm talking to caption head, arranger, and all-around percussionist Tyler Campbell, and we're going through his experiences working with the UConn Percussion section, as well as just overall technique and mindset in the activity. All right, we're back again. Had a little bit of a break there, but I'm actually hitting you with a three-peat this month. Specifically, today I have Tyler Campbell, as I said, and coming up next, just so you know, I have two cymbal-specific podcasts, which I'm super hyped on. It's kind of a public service announcement there. I have Rex Gutierrez, kind of representing a West Coast upbringing and perspective, and then Kat Godfrey, representing a bit more of an East Coast upbringing. Just to kind of compare and contrast some ideas and just give general information on cymbals. You know, there's so much information being shared, and even prior to COVID and all these podcasts and stuff, I didn't really see much information on cymbals, so I was really curious to learn something and hopefully share something new with some of you out there. So again, super hyped about that. Those will be out within the week of this episode coming out, so just keep your eyes and ears peeled. But here's the episode with Tyler Campbell. How you doing, Tyler?
Doing well, Bryson. How you doing? Long time no chat. We chat like every day.
Yeah. So do you want to, I guess kind of broadly we'll end up going over college band for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe it's COVID teaching techniques, I suppose, if we have
some heck yeah.
Maybe just like technique reform, since that's probably been most of our conversations for like 4 months.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Absolutely.
But do you want to just go into just who you are first? You don't have to go super long. You can go super long if you want. It's up to you, just to give people background on just who you are.
Sure. Yeah, so I'd helped to start like an indoor drum line at my high school alma mater, which is Woodstock Academy up in the quiet corner.
All right.
And we actually had, so I guess this was my first experience with marching percussion. We were doing like a festivals of music thing down in DC for like the band trip, and I had seen for the awards ceremony. This was like concert band, symphonic band, and they get adjudicated and they get scored. It was kind of like a competition thing. And for the awards ceremony, they had this drumline come up in between awards when they were happening, and it was a high school drumline. But it was sort of that show style drumline. So what would you consider HBCU style? But it was at the high school level. But I saw that and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like I'd never seen anything like that before. So this was my first experience, like looking at a drumline, quite literally. And this was like my junior year of high school, heading into senior year. So kind of a late bloomer, as you'd call it. Coming into the activity. So we got help from the administration of the school to like just get we got like some Pearl Championship Series drums. And we started like a little indoor drum line, and we were just kind of playing through some stock charts and stuff for my senior year. Mm-hmm. And Tom Hannum actually came, the mobile percussion seminar, and we got them to come for a day and work with us, which was really cool. And then obviously I got to learn about UMass program and Tom Hannum and everything they were doing up there. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I went to UConn, ended up going for music at the University of Connecticut. And that was kind of my first real experience in a more, serious marching percussion environment. At the time, Chris Horvat was heading up the battery there.
Oh yeah. I met him one time. He taught at 7th for like 2 days or a day?
Yeah, a day or two. Yeah, it was. I think it was that same week that Dan Shack came in too.
I think it was, yeah.
That year, yeah. So for those listening, Bryson and I marched together in 2012, and so anyways, so that was really cool. I played tenor my first year, and then ended up on the snare for the remainder of that. And kind of through that, college band is kind of difficult to have sort of consistent staff numbers throughout. I mean, we rehearse, from 4 to 6, 3 days out of the week. So the timing is difficult for people with full-time jobs to come out. And so staff kind of fell away sort of in my last couple of years there. We had, I will say, Marvin McNeil was really a great thread between kind of Chris Horvat and I taking over the program. Mm-hmm. He really held the percussion together and was really the spirit of that drum line, that whole percussion section, really.
Was Matt Thompson there while you
Matt was there, yeah. Yeah, my first year, Matt Thompson was section leader. He was a center snare, drum captain, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And then he was on staff for a year after that, but always had kind of like a rotating cast of staff. But for the most part, it's been in-house. The people that have come through the program ended up on staff teaching for, anywhere between a year to 4 or 5 years. So Chris kind of got serious with his job. He was a mechanical engineer for air engines at Pratt & Whitney. And then he ended up, he got married, had kids. And so life kind of took over for him. And it was really just Marvin. And I ended up teaching from within my last year. I guess I was section leader my last 2 years.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I started teaching, was from within, which was interesting perspective. And then to kind of get on the other side, which is what I'm doing with you now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities there, but yeah, it was interesting to have those two perspectives. But I started from within, and I ended up really loving the aspect of teaching. I guess I would say the psychological aspect of really it's coaching.
Yeah, I was about to say coaching. Yeah.
Yeah, I relate it a lot to, like what Gino Auriemma does with the women's basketball team, what Jim Calhoun was doing. Mm-hmm. So that mentality, that spirit has always kind of been in the air at UConn. And so I've kind of always applied that stuff to what's going on in band, even though it's not competitive in the college world. It's stimulating to me. Like the psychological coaching aspect is just it's awesome. Especially when you don't have that sort of tangible, reward or that score at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's like, what can you get out of people? What can you get out of yourself, first of all? And then what can you get out of the people you're teaching in an environment where you're not going to get that tangible award at the end of the day? Mm-hmm. And we've been talking about that with Newtown too, since we, who knows what's going to happen this year with COVID.
Yeah.
And everything going on. And we've been doing the virtual thing with them for some time now. And, there's a chance that they don't compete. There's a chance they don't even get to perform, really. So tying in what I learned about that from college band. It's interesting. But that's kind of, long and short, that's my background. I was a percussion studio major at UConn. So I have the music degree and everything, and for whatever that's worth. And I try to gig when I can. There's not much gigging happening now, but
yeah. So when you were in 7th Regiment in 2012 with me, where did that line up with UConn? Was that did you enter that after a year of UConn? I'm not really sure where that was for you.
I found out about drum corps kind of late in the game. I mean, probably my second year at UConn, I kind of got hip to what Chris's background. So Chris Horvat marched cadets in 2000, 2002. Mm-hmm. And then he was teaching some DCA lines. I think he worked with Hurricanes for a little bit, Hawthorne, yes. Caballeros. And 7th Regiment was also kind of on the radar. And I was learning, the difference between DCA and DCI. And they had openings, and this was Jeff Bickford's first year there.
Yeah.
So I heard some stuff about Jeff, some positive things, and went down to the camp and ended up marching the season. And I think, I was a one and done. I didn't do it after that. I was 20 years old when I marched.
So were you a junior at that time?
Yeah. I was a junior. This kind of old guy in the battery too.
Yeah, I think I was like 16 or like 17 or something. I was
like 15, 16. They're like, who's this guy? But it was fun, man. It was a great experience. And I think I was already kind of in the mode of like, I really already loved teaching from within. And I wanted to kind of use that experience to help fuel the knowledge, to continue to do that and to do it better. So I kind of use that as like a tool for that. What can I pull from this one season? And then I wasn't able to march my age out because I had to pay for school and stuff. But the experience was awesome. It was great marching with you guys, and I learned a lot that year. I learned a lot about getting in tune with my body too from some of the instructors we had.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. Like it was kind of hip to the mental game, but then there was like getting in tune with your body, the stretching we were doing, and some of the body work in general was getting popular in drum corps at the time. You were seeing like WGI theatrical work come out in the field. So
yeah, actually, cool. Well, that was an interesting aspect for small group too. Because I mean, you don't always see that at world-class corps. We were essentially, if I remember correctly, doing Insanity or like chunks of Insanity as our kind of warm-up for the day, which is pretty extreme. I mean, you could burn, if you do it full out, like the actual thing, you could burn like anywhere between like 1,000 to 2,000 calories per workout, which is pretty scary. But no, I remember vividly a lot of the, I think it was John Ambrose, the Boston guy who was doing a lot of the stretching. I remember that being very, very positive and actually like learning a lot just about hip muscles and just how those stretch and how those work from those. I can't remember who else was there that year. I really get lost between the 3 seasons I was there with who was running visual especially. Yeah. But I think John was a through line.
He was the first that came to my mind. And yeah, I mean, just got me aware of parts of my body I wasn't aware of.
Yeah,
it was crazy some of the stretches he had us doing. I remember one time he had us laying on our back and we were doing this. He had us with our legs up, like stretching our hips to kind of pull our hips out, just to get us aware of that. That being the pendulum point for marching, the rotation point. And I was like, wow, what a great day! This is a great day.
That's honestly probably some of the most relaxing times I can think about in terms of drum corps.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Even though it's like very hard to march like East Coast open class because it's very, not everyone's super skilled yet, and it's very. I mean, again, we're doing Insanity in the morning or abridged versions of that, and then just going ham the rest of the day on East Coast style drill, which is kind of rough, but solid preparation for the work ethic, I suppose, definitely. But okay. So I guess as you are now at UConn, it's kind of one of your big things that you do. Can you define your role with UConn's just so everyone's like aware of exactly like what you do technically?
Yeah, so I guess the title is Battery Coordinator / Arranger. It's kind of like what a caption head would be doing in a competitive environment. They just don't call it that because it's not a competitive environment.
Yeah.
So I arrange for the battery, whether it's their main core show, like what you would see a drum corps do, a 3 or 4 part show. Or they also have a slew of what they call B shows, which kind of rotate in and out depending on what they're asked to do per weekend.
Yeah.
And then I'm kind of there teaching full time, and lately I've had that box level role where I'm kind of taking a broader view of things and looking at everything from an ensemble standpoint, and I'm kind of up there with the directors, evaluating from a percussion standpoint how everything is blending together and working together front to back. And so I'm mostly just with the battery, and then we have other staff there for the front ensemble. Evan Glickman writes for the front ensemble, and so I work closely with him when we're arranging and when we're teaching as well. So yeah, that's pretty much the extent of it. They rehearse
3 times a week. And then Saturdays are usually all day, whether it's football games, which they won't be this year, or they may have to go do an exhibition show at, high school competition. So they'll have like a college band or 2 or 3 perform at those shows at the end of the night.
And you guys do Allentown too, right?
Yeah. Allentown is like a college band festival, which is really cool because you see all these different styles of bands. I mean, I guess most of it is the Northeast style, but everybody's so different, even in that geographical realm, So it's cool to watch what they do in the lot and then watch what they do on the field at those festivals. And it's all just for fun. I mean, they're out there playing their butts off. There's a lot of great bands and great programs that are doing the thing. And it's like, but it's just for entertainment and just to kind of be out there together and making music. That's what's so great about college band.
It's interesting because I feel like to the layman, especially people that are getting into high school drumline and like their parents and stuff, you'd think that college naturally would just be an extension of high school where it's still like the same deal, except it's just a lot better. I don't know if my parents quite understood that for the longest time. I definitely didn't either. But it's interesting how it's like high school and like independent organizations like WGI and DCI and DCA become this like, or DCE, become this its own thing, and then college band still like exists within its own environment to an extent, even though easily people reach back and forth between them. We have UMass up here, which is a huge hub for cadets, and Boston, but people end up going to Crown from there, all over the place. And you see those people I'm sure with UConn as well. Some of those folks marching, such as Anthony, most recently.
And they do that, and it's interesting because they're out there with a world-class drum corps over the summer, and they'll still come back to the band, and most of them, I'll say, are able to kind of separate the two pretty well. I mean, sometimes it's difficult, and you've seen people come through that, like, it took them a minute to like, to understand that, like, okay, this is band, this is everybody's coming from different backgrounds, different skill levels, different styles, and so you can't have that sort of maybe aggression, hype mode that you want to be in coming off of the drum corps season. But they'll still come back, and I feel like it gets better every year. I experienced a similar thing after I marched drum corps, but it's kind of its own thing. It's its own sort of family that's you just come to love and respect. After you come home from your other family, you're home away from home.
So how do you talked about coaching, and I think a lot of us, like you're saying, we definitely understand just the general concept of coaching within a competitive environment, such as any kind of sport, or like the crazy women's basketball team. That was one of the sports teams that I just grew up watching, just because I moved here, and it was like, wow.
If you get a chance, and for those listening, Gino, they followed the team for an HBO special in 2016, I think it was. And it opened the doors to kind of how he operates from a psychological standpoint with them, and it's well worth the watch if you get a chance to check it out.
So how do you take that mindset, like you were saying, and apply it to something that's non-competitive? Because I definitely see, especially with UConn, knowing a lot of people that have gone through that band, I definitely see like the family culture, and of course it's a major university. I mean, everyone knows UConn usually if they're into sports, and it has that reputation behind it. Maybe it's easier for people to get in there and kind of feel good about being a part of this whole thing. But even within that, how do you approach the coaching aspect to keep things still, at a high level and still moving forward?
What's great about that question is I think of Jamie Spillane, who is the choral director up at UConn. Shout out Jamie Spillane, and he was my conducting teacher, and I think it was my junior year there. And one of his famous quotes is, "It's fun to be great." And I think that kind of summed it up for me. It was like when I heard him say that, it was like, yes, that's what I'm trying to get across here. I just didn't really know how to put it into words. That it's fun to be great. So you sort of like, you have to balance this whole thing where it's like, well, we want to be clean. We want to be good. We want to be the best we can be, but we also want to have fun, right? Because it's college band. At the end of the day, you're out there entertaining a football crowd, or you're entertaining a crowd at a college band festival. So how do you balance that? And I think that they feed into each other. So that's kind of what I use. I use that as a tool. It's like, well, if you have a positive mindset when you go in to teach them, and you let that sort of be distributed within the culture, then you can use, being good, being, at least trying to be as clean as possible with the time frame you're given, to make that fun, to make that feel good. So it's not like you're coming in saying, guys, that sucks. Like, better, because it's not. It works in some environments, but it's not going to work there, right? Because people aren't going to stay. They're just not. And I think not to get off topic, but shifting into another thing, which is retention versus recruitment. I mean, in college band, you really cannot recruit.
Yeah.
It's a lot tougher because the person has to be, registered, enrolled, accepted to the school. And then you are dealing with all these branch campuses. I mean, UConn has, 6 different campuses. So since we operate in stores, like if you're put in Stanford, you really can't be in the band, right? So it's really hard to recruit. So the key thing is retention. And that's something that I even heard Tom Hannum talk about in the UMass Roundtable. It's all about retention. You have to make it fun and make kids want to come back.
Was he talking about that on or was that like a marching arts education roundtable thing, or was that a?
Yeah, that was not particularly. That was discussions in percussion with Damon Grant. Yeah, Damon Grant and Marcos Torres. So they had Colin McNutt, Ian Hale, and Tom Hannum all at the roundtable. It was really cool. But so retention is key, and so kind of backtracking to what you were asking me before. Yeah, I think the main thing there is trying to get them to understand that it's fun to be great, to quote Jamie Spillane, and that's been kind of the driving force for me. So yeah.
Well, actually, I think your choir example really did it for me. That makes a lot of sense. Because I mean, I did choir in college. I was very much a fan of being in choir. I was not much of a singer necessarily. We kind of just grow up doing it in elementary school, middle school anyways, if you're in the music programs a lot of the times. So it's not like a complete mystery, but I think once you get into a room with a bunch of college-level kids and do something like that, where it's like a big ensemble, this one was in particular, and work on that type of music with people that just understand what's happening to a degree,
right.
It's kind of a powerful experience. It's like I wasn't a choir person. I wasn't always in choir in high school. And it made me wish I did, because it's interesting being involved with that many voices in one place and creating, especially what's kind of more idiomatic to choir, all the dissonant sounds that kind of open up your ears to, like Eric Whitacre, and just listening to that type of music in general and how it works. But I guess in relation, kind of like the example you gave, and also how, like at UConn, you're joining this group of, again, college-educated kids, and especially if you came from a lesser school, it's probably a huge shift. Even going to like DCI auditions and playing with a full drum line, people that know to hit the drum at all for the first time is pretty insane. So I can imagine that gives people a little bit of a motivation there.
Absolutely, and some of the new members that come in, they are intimidated, and I forget that. It's like, because you compare it to drum corps, and it's like, well, those guys are playing their butts off, but it can be intimidating for somebody coming in, and that's not really the goal. But that kind of brings me to talk about culture, which is super important. It's something I've been learning about, especially in the past few years, how important it is. Yeah. Where, you kind of establish a culture that is positive, that wants to be good, and a culture where they like each other. They like doing what they do together. And we've had times where at UConn and even at Newtown, some times where that wasn't the case. Yeah. And so you're also kind of navigating from the outside. How can you sort of instill a better culture on the inside? And once you're able to do that, you then have a stepping off point, and then you can kind of step back and watch the culture kind of feed into itself. So I guess I'm talking about like spark, really, the right way. It'll feed off of itself. And that's kind of something that's been happening at UConn lately, and it's been great. But then when the new members come in, right, they have to fit into that culture. And if you've established it with a strong enough framework, then that will happen naturally, organically.
Now, let me ask you this. Just thinking about that, I've never really thought about this before. But it's like, yeah, okay, so igniting that spark in something that's not inherently competitive.
Yeah.
Do you find that it's actually any more difficult, to a degree, to ignite a spark there versus a high school that is competitive? So I guess that's also a major challenge on the opposite of the spectrum too. When it is competitive, It's still hard.
Yeah, it is, because there's no tangible goal. There's not, okay, look, guys, we want to get this score, right? Or we want to rank here. And I guess if you're talking about day to day, maybe that's really not what you're using as a motivational tool, even in the drum corps world. But I guess you're right. It is more difficult. I come from that environment, so for me, that's just been natural. It's just like, okay, let's just be good because we can. Like, there's potential. Yeah. I'm always looking at potential. No matter what it is, it's like, if we're not meeting potential that we could meet, why not? That's what I always ask them. It's like, why not? So let's just get this done. And people typically agree with that. People will be like, yeah, that's true. Why not?
Yeah.
Let's get on board. If you frame it in a positive way, if you're not yelling at people.
Okay.
And I guess that just comes down to always refining leadership, and leadership is it's a huge word. It's so complex, and there's so much that goes into it. And all I can say is that you just have to keep your ears open and seek to get better at that concept every year.
Yeah.
And it kind of feeds into itself, whether it's through your staff or through the members themselves. I mean, college band by nature is more student leadership heavy than probably anything in the competitive environment. Even in a drum corps, there's a staff for this, there's a staff member for this, there's a staff member for this. And in college band, I think typically that's not the case. A lot of them will have somewhat of a full percussion staff, but there's really not a lot of other subsection staff for winds and, brass woodwinds, what have you. So there's a lot left to the student leadership. And so leadership is something that's really emphasized and refined, always fine-tuned. And that's so this is where I come from. So I guess it would be hard for somebody moving from, a competitive environment and then being asked to motivate a college band, college program. That'd probably be more difficult. I don't have that perspective. If you kind of do it right in the competitive environment and you don't necessarily use the scores and the rankings as a tool for motivation, then you'll be fine translating into an environment that's not competitive.
Yeah, if you just have the right philosophy.
Yeah, because all in all, like when we were in drum corps, we weren't a top. We were a top 5 corps in open classes that year, but we weren't like a top 3 percussion program, right? We weren't shooting for that. So each day was just, even in the way Jeff Bickford framed it, was similar. It was, hey guys, we're out here being the absolute best that we can be, because why not? We're all doing this together. Like, we're all here for this amount of time. That's just what it's about, and that's kind of a life thing. Like, I see it beyond the activity for everything that we do. It's just helping people become better members and contributors to society. It's way more than what they're doing in the activity. So I think if you have that mindset in a competitive environment, there's no problem translating that into something that's non-competitive. That's just my feeling.
That's a good point. This is the dumbest thing ever, but I recently, in my fashion, watched an anime, and it was called Haikyuu, I think, technically. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a volleyball anime. I typically don't go into, sports stuff, but I heard it was great, so I watched it. But To be honest, I think you would love this show.
Right.
And I didn't think I would like it, but I got hooked on it because, okay, so it's volleyball, like it's a competitive thing, and it's talking about just a program in general, right? And it's that program's journey through its high school aspirations to be at nationals or whatever. And in Japan was notorious for having great volleyball teams, and it's cool to see like kind of a developed perspective on a team.
I didn't know that.
Oh, they're great. It's really wild. I've been talking to my parents about it recently because I watched the real clips.
Yeah.
You know, they try to animate the real techniques that are used in volleyball, and it's like a lot of the shorter people will have these insane jumps and spikes. It's so fast paced, and it kind of made me wish I did volleyball in high school. But I guess what I'm getting at is that, you know, it starts out with kids just learning technique, and it talks about all the different technique and approaches to volleyball. And I was like, that kind of got me hooked because I'm just so interested in drumming technique and just how everything transfers.
Right.
And, you know, they focus around like two people that don't know exactly what they're doing, kind of like hone their approach to be like a force, and that's kind of like a driving factor of the show. But,
Yeah.
you know, it kind of hovers around that the whole time, and it really digs into it. And by the time they get to this nationals thing or whatever, they do start to heavily enforce all these teamwork ideals that I had never really thought about. You know, I grew up playing soccer. Like my dad was a soccer coach. My team is my sister's team. And, you know, I was part of that, but I never quite understood. I never had like aspirations. I was just doing it just 'cause. And, you know, they get to the point where they're talking about all they care about is just being able to play another game of volleyball. And it's not, you know, there's definitely like, I guess like an adrenaline rush from, you know, being in a tight spot, but it's like, it comes down to it's just like, if we lose, we don't get to play another game of volleyball with the same team of people. And a lot of the show is not even that. A lot of it is just the process. A lot of it is just practice games and like learning how things work. But within that, it's a lot of exploring a team dynamic and how you keep kind of wild personalities under control, how you need to perceive what you're doing in order to have a successful group of something, of a sport, of whatever. And I highly recommend people watch that. It really ignited a fire in me.
I have to check that out.
It was really a sleeper on me. I didn't expect anything from it.
Right.
Granted, I'm also in COVID, and I'm just sitting here on my couch binging volleyball anime. But but yeah, it was cool to hear that coming from a country that has a strong tradition of high school volleyball, and it had context and purpose behind it. But I wish I could remember like more quotes or specific things that happen in the show. But it kind of like approaches all the power dynamic issues and problems, and it focuses on how like people just be like, oh, I want this team to be better. Like I really want to go to nationals, and like here's how we're going to practice to get there, and shows how that inspires other people to practice, and how the people that are leading the group, I guess student leadership, if you will, is guiding that. Yeah. And they're supporting that, and they're overseeing that, making sure it happens, and that the communication is occurring, and everyone's on the same page. But a little bit of a segue there, but I thought that was very interesting.
That reminds me of you know, a show I was watching with my roommate during COVID as well, about Michael Jordan. It was amazing just to watch. I mean, they went into it, you know, year to year, with sort of how he led the team, his dynamic, and how everybody else contributed to that and fed off of that leadership. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they brought up too was how he was not always liked, you know, and that's kind of a part of leadership. It's, I guess you would call it a sacrifice, right? So you're not always going to be liked if you are really striving to get the best out of people. And that was the case with him. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, you know, he's a human being. He's a cool person to hang out with, right? So it was just one of those things where it's like, okay, if we're in that rehearsal mode, that practice mode, you may not like me, but you're going to understand, you're going to realize at the end of the day that I was just kind of that way to get the best out of you. And if you have a coach or a leader that is able to make you understand able to allow you to understand that. You may not like them in every moment, but I think that's the important thing. So I guess choosing leadership too is key. If you are kind of in control of choosing that student leadership you were talking about, that's a really important aspect that's going to set the tone for the season or, the semester, whatever your time period is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess we got really heavy into the topic of leadership, but I love it.
Well, I think
it's always, we're always learning, man. We're always fine tuning that.
I think John Mapes was talking about something at some point. I always go back to John Mapes in these about, he's divided between a couple groups. I think two. I mean, they have like a junior program in Chino. They have their high school program. They have Pulse. Not sure if he's doing another high school as well. I don't think so. But I think him and Ian Rum are splitting time there, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah.
And they might just be there like one day and then on a Saturday, or maybe it's just the shows. I can't really remember. I'm sure it varies, obviously, but but he did mention on some videos somewhere of how the student leadership is a major part of Chino Hills and those groups, because it needs to run, but it's like it's the team factor. It's like people wonder what the secret sauce is down there, and it's just like, how do you run a good team? They're probably doing it.
Right.
It's probably happening.
Yeah, it's all on culture. That reminds me of maybe it was the same video. Somebody asked him, how do you get everybody to buy in? Like, how do you do that? Everybody buys in. He goes, well, not everybody buys in, but if you guys believe that, then we're doing the thing. So it's like, that was like, oh, okay, true. Not everybody is going to buy in 100% of the time, but if you can form a good enough team where that's sort of the impression people get.
Yeah. So I guess transitioning back to more specifically the college thing, just to kind of delve into some other stuff. You're mentioning to me how it can be kind of different based on sports culture, for sure. I'm assuming
yes,
has a major thing to play in terms of amount of people in the band, et cetera, and amount of exposure, and also just geography in general. And I'd imagine geography can also play into the style. And then there's like this East Coast thing that shows up in drum corps, but is that different in band? Like, is it just more regimented in the East Coast? Is it just its own thing that's different from, say, like Indiana University or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you can talk about with that. I mean, the Northeast, I guess UMass is the same as UConn in that they do what we call core style marching.
Okay.
Where, we're not out there, they're not out there high stepping like you would see in maybe Ohio State. I think Notre Dame does that, where they really lift the foot high, and it's this big presentation. It's this big, presence really that they have. For us, it's we kind of blend the traditional style of marching, the show band, and the drum corps thing. So it's this interesting mix. I really I enjoy it a lot. You could say that it's hard to form an identity in a way as a band, but for me, it's like the way I see it is the identity is that melting pot of styles.
Yeah.
They're being asked to do different things every weekend. Like I was saying earlier, like one weekend they have to do a football game. Well, that's a crowd that's not super into band, right? Like they're there for the football game. And so you have to go out there and entertain their butts off.
Yeah.
Because not all of them are sober, and, not every football game is won, especially at UConn currently. So, but the football culture, the sports culture has a lot to do with the style, like you were saying. Out in the Midwest and the South, even some of the West Coast programs, the football is huge. I mean, it's massive. And so it's a lot easier for the band to be appreciated in that environment. There's so many more people outside the stadium, never mind inside, right? And they're just like hyping on the band all the time. So at a place like UConn, it's more of a challenge. I know the football team was doing really well, and I love the whole rebuilding thing, which is kind of the mode they're in right now. I love watching that, but again, because of what we were talking about with coaching. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it presents a challenge. It presents a challenge geographically. It was like, okay, when Jim Calhoun got to UConn to do what he did, I mean, that dude was at a huge disadvantage geographically. You know, the Big East was nothing as a basketball conference at that time.
Yeah.
But it shows you that it's possible to have a great program, even with those disadvantages. So it's interesting. But yeah, so basically it's a core style marching. You know, it's we do everything off the left foot. And the drill is, it can be kind of intense, but there's more people out on the field. You know, there's, I guess, UConn hovers around 300 people.
Okay.
So the drill can't be too crazy, right? I mean, generally the step size is going to be a lot smaller than in a drum corps, but they're still moving for their core show. You know, they have, like I said, an exhibition show that's like 3 or 4 parts, and that's kind of the consistent project that they work on throughout the season. But in between that, they have to work on these side charts, you know, B-tunes, because what they'll do for like the football game is they maybe play one part of the show, the core show, and then they'll tack on a B-tune chart depending on what the event is at the football game. So like maybe, you know, the president of the university recently just got inaugurated, or maybe it's a military appreciation day or something.
Oh, yeah.
So they kind of have to tune that to what's going on. But it makes it interesting. And in a way, it kind of helps the core show. It kind of helps the exhibition show be energized, because they're always taking a break from it every week. So it's not like you're kind of hammering out the same thing every single day. I mean, there's a beauty in that for drum corps, obviously. But in a way, for kids that aren't super, you know, serious about band, it kind of provides a relief and an opportunity to play different music outside of the main project. So in a way, it kind of fuels the main, you know, the core show when we do get to go back and rehearse that. You know, we may not rehearse a part of the show for a week, depending on what's going on that particular week, and then they go back to it the following week, and it's like, it's revitalizing. You know, it's like, oh wow, I forgot about this. This song is awesome. You know, it just feels good to play with so much sound. And that's really what college band is about. It's about putting out the sound. I mean, when you're at a high school competition, there's some really kick-butt shows that these high schools put out. But the contrast of then having a college band come out on the field before awards and just kind of park and blow, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
To experience that. So yeah, that's kind of what. Yeah, it's a real melting pot in the Northeast. Places like Michigan, which we've been to, football is huge, and there's probably, because of that, there's more tradition established. Like the fans are more connected with the band, who are more connected with the football team, because there's this winning tradition that's been established for years, and so they have these. I mean, there's student chants that they do with the band, like all over the place, you know. And we don't quite have that established at UConn at the moment. I guess there's always room for that, depending on which direction sports go. You know, the football program goes, but yeah, it presents challenges that are kind of awesome to try and conquer. In my opinion, it's like sometimes the kids go out there and they're not really playing for anybody. You know, the stadium might be empty on a given day, for real. And but in a way that can be fulfilling if you help frame it that way for them.
So do you think a lot of, maybe if there was some kind of reform and the band became a bigger thing, or even the football team or the sports teams, do you think a lot of that more so might rely on the education and coaching of music students and sports students in the kind of more local high schools in New England area feeding into UConn? I don't know if that like creates a better culture of sports teams and thus energizes, and I guess the audience. I suppose.
I never really thought about what happens before the college sports culture.
Because like you're saying, you could reform it. Like someone amazing could come in and just do what is necessary to make something great. But I wonder, like, you know, with Texas, I mean, Texas has been a thing. It's just been how it is forever. I think most people, when they think marching band and football, they immediately go to Texas. And a part of me wonders, I mean, there's got to be, I don't know what the chicken or the egg came first, but a lot of the funding for like high schools must come from how important it is down there.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure.
I think in our area it's separate. It's like, I think David Mills has generated enough interest in just the band alone that kids who want to join the band just join the band. I mean, there's no real incentive for that. So the fact that they're getting 300 people to do that every year, it's pretty incredible when you think about it, because there's no strong football culture at the moment, and there's no scholarships being offered for kids to join band or anything like that. So I think, what he's established in his time there, just a general growing interest in being a part of the band. And I think another key point to that is, what are you putting out on media? Who's behind your media? How are they, producing that? Is it quality content? Are you being consistent putting out content? That's another huge part of it. And we both know Jason Ryder, he kind of was really lit the fire at UConn in terms of what the band was putting out for media.
Okay.
And so yeah, that's also really important, especially if you don't have that culture like you're talking about. I think that the two things are separate. I don't know really at the high school level how you would combine them, because I'm not sure that there's a huge high school football culture right now in Connecticut per se either. Like in Texas for sure. I mean, we talk about Friday Night Lights, right? Like it's huge even in high school. So yeah, that you're definitely right. It does feed into college from high school. Here we just have the competitive high school thing going on. We have U.S. bands happening, and it's so, like you were saying earlier, like kids they don't really know what to expect when they join a college band in this area, and they find out quick, and most of them end up loving it, because it's like, okay, I can kind of relax a little because we're not necessarily going after a score, but this band is still kind of kicking butt, and I'm having fun doing this. So that's sort of, it's just that it kind of has generated its own growing interest.
Connecticut's interesting too. I mean, we've talked about how Connecticut is really strange on a band level. It makes me wonder how it is on a sports level. I mean, I can't sit here and say that I feel like there's any information, at least percussively, being shared between any of the groups in Connecticut whatsoever. I mean, one of my biggest incentives for doing this podcast was to provide just information to some of the local kids that maybe outside the box, just different from something they've heard before. But like, it's just something that is not as bad anymore, like the tension, and just needs to be kind of just talked out. But like, yeah, I mean, unlike the West Coast, it's like information is freely shared between groups. There's no issue there. I mean, that's why it's progressing faster, and it is what it is. And it's like Connecticut's been in this place where it's stagnated for years, and then one day some people come along, they're like, oh, like, I think we know what we're doing, and start working with some of the programs, and then sometimes they'll just filter away, and then nothing develops from it.
Maybe that stems from the job culture in the Northeast too. It's like, that kind of reminds me of like job security as a whole. It's like people that have information that they think is correct don't want to share it for the sake of their own program. I don't know. I mean, but I think if everybody just learned, like kind of what you're going for, if people just learn to let go, they'd realize that everybody will benefit from it. It makes the whole thing better in your geographical realm, whatever you're talking about. So I love that's one of your goals with this podcast. I mean, I think we need more of that. And with you and I both have experienced just this wealth of information coming out of this pandemic, from folks that are high up in the game that normally would be out with a drum corps at this time, kind of in the trenches, and they have the opportunity to share information, and they're doing that, and they're doing it for free, and it's incredible. And I hope that everybody can kind of learn from that and be more willing to share information. I think it's really important, and it's a good reason why places like the West Coast are generally, it's happening over there.
Yeah. So, I should probably also say too, like, if anyone from the the Northeast is listening to this that teaches schools just in Connecticut or whatever, like, I'm super down to just talk about technique, design, whatever. I'm quite an introvert, and it's hard for me to just
You
go
never
up
tell.
to people and just connect like right away. But like I'm super, super down. I will talk to anybody for hours about any of this stuff. But yeah, I feel like there's always just like this underlying sense in general of people just being a little off kilter and like
Maybe that's a winter
competitive.
thing. Maybe our winters are just getting too long, man.
Yeah, just get a little.
I like it because I do winter sports. I snowboard, but man, after 3 months, I'm all set.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a winter thing. I don't know.
So, I guess we can transition from there. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that like folks in Connecticut and really everywhere have to worry about is what are we doing now? And the college band thing might also be a good tie-in too, because it's like the competitive incentive is disappearing minute by minute. Quite literally, I believe BOA was officially canceled
Right.
a few hours ago. We're not involved in BOA, but just 'cause
Yeah, but it's coming.
Northeast bands. But yeah,
On our
exactly.
way.
And it's weird because U.S. bands, it's like the last frontier. It's one of the only quotations major circuits that are still, or that is still going in the United States. And I'm sure it'll probably get canceled at some point. I don't know. I don't have any information on that. But I mean, if it's not, I mean, people. I said this to Kevin Thompson earlier today. It's like they started their thing with flow marching. It's gonna be like everyone's outlet's gonna be watching Northeast Standstill Band, and it's gonna be a rough time. That's a sad sight to see. But we have to transition to online learning first of all.
Right.
With our case, we do have the opportunity to start doing well orchestrated, distanced, hour-long rehearsals when we can. But what do you do going forward when there's no competitive incentive and maybe no in-person incentive? It's like how do you manage that? How do we think about that as students, as teachers? Which I guess is a huge philosophical question. And for us, it's like we've been so obsessed with thinking about technique and taking the time to just reform understanding of how things work and maybe how we've learned things in the past and update ourselves.
Yeah,
that's kind of fun in itself. It's just like when you're a teacher, you might be more motivated to that. But I guess I wonder if a lot of stuff moving forward is going to be trying to translate that feeling to the students and allow them just what it's like to improve and understand and just be good at something, like you were saying, just be high quality as a person.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, we had to figure that out, and I guess we did some sort of syllabus thing where we we said, well, what do we want to attack, with each virtual session? We're going to space them out in 2 weeks so it's not overbearing in this new world. There's also a lot of uncertainty. Like, I didn't really know how it was going to go. I wasn't necessarily worried about it. I was like, well, it's going to be, look, just approach it like we're in an in-person rehearsal, except you're going to, have limitations. And that's kind of how I viewed it. And I think but we did prepare. We put together a syllabus and we said, well, this is kind of the goal for each session that we do. And if we can get this stuff done, or at least introduce the topic to them, and then in between we have these video assignments where we get actually more of that one-on-one sort of mentoring, tutoring experience, because you get to give them feedback to the video that they post. And like you started to do the whole thing where your feedback was actually just a video of you talking to them. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So I kind of hopped on that train with you, and it's awesome. It makes it still personal, and it's not far from what we would normally be doing, but I think it gives us more time to think about what it is that we want to attack in between each session. It gives us more time to really sit and think and map out probably the most critical part of the season, which to me is the summer. And for UConn college band, it's the winter season. It's the spring semester, because that's their off season, in quotes. And that time of year is like when you get good. And I try to tell my students that too. It's like, this is your time right now. We have this time. We don't have performances breathing down our neck. It's a stress-free thing. We can really attack fundamentals. We can do it in a fun way, but it's a key time. So yeah, you and I sat down and we spent time kind of developing that, and so far it's been pretty successful, I think. I don't know how deep we want to get into it, but I think one of the key things behind it is having the kids be engaged. So it's not like you're just talking at them. Like, who wants to do that, right? They're all doing that already in school, when school went to online platforms, whether it's whatever age you are, high school, college. And you know, I think there are some teachers out there who are really trying to get innovative with that, and I applaud them. And like some of the music teachers at my alma mater, high school, are incredible with what they've been able to do. But some of them are just kind of like being more passive about it and like, well, we'll get through this. But I think you really need to get the kids engaged in the process. So if they are maybe introverted, or they don't, you know, they're generally quiet people, maybe you can help them with some prompt questions and just get a discussion rolling. And maybe, you know, a more extroverted student will get the ball rolling and they'll be the first to talk. But then it allows that door to open for more people to talk. I think the more that you have a conversation with them, the easier it is. And so, like you've seen, and we've been trying to do that too. I kind of open the floor to the kids to talk for 20 to 30 minutes up front. And I think that's important because it takes away the whole like, we're online, this isn't going to work. It takes away that whole mentality. I think it just opens the gates to just a new mode of learning. And I think for percussion, it's obviously easier because, you know, it is more of a visual thing than playing another instrument. For a group setting, it's easier. You know, we do the whole thing where we have one person who is not muted, and they'll play the pattern, whatever we're working on, in short exercises. Keep it short. And then everybody else is just on mute playing along, and we can at least see what's going on. And we've learned over the years from playing and teaching and the activity kind of how to use the eyes to understand what's being felt and what kind of sound they're putting out. Although it's not, you know, it's not 100%, but it's the best we can do. So it's been fun.
I found it to be pretty positive in a sense where, I mean, it's the first time that at least our students are forced to have more individual accountability over what they're doing. And it's like so obvious if you didn't practice. And it's like, it's just you. It's you in a video. It's just like, all right, here's last week's video. Here's your video right now. Where are we at? So, I mean, it kind of at least promotes some kind of progress.
Right.
Maybe if that was an issue with someone else's group, like where they have come with individual practice time and stuff. But what I thought was most interesting about the in-person rehearsal is like, well, yeah, it's like it's not fully together yet or anything, but like everyone's separated by a lot of space and the sound was like pretty centered. Right. And that was very interesting. And I think some of that has to do with us just redefining everything from what we've previously done. But I found that to be interesting. And I also have to imagine it's because it's like, yeah, we have an hour. It's also a drum set. Ooh, drum set. But having to like force yourself to focus in that hour, not only because you have the hour, but because it's like this is the first time I can actually like do something in person where it feels like legit and like there's other people here, and it's done in a fairly safe way where it's not as nerve-wracking.
For those who don't know, we are the COVID guidelines in Connecticut. We are only allowed to rehearse for an hour at a time with our kids in person. So yeah, like you're saying, it takes a lot of like, hey, we need to, and we talk about this with the kids. It's always an open conversation. It's like, hey, you know, we need to make this as efficient as possible. Do you guys agree? And they agree, of course. Yeah. You know, and so they're ready to go. They all showed up like a half an hour early, and because they know, you know, we just keep the conversation open. And I think what you're talking about with the center of sound is interesting, and I think it's also a result of just, you know, leveraging the video thing, but there's also maybe more time in between for them to actually listen back to the videos than if you're in the middle of maybe if you're preparing for a drum corps season where it's like, okay, I get my staff feedback, I see the comment, you know, there's an essay of a comment here, and I'm going to show up at the next camp and see what happens. It's not that. It's like, you know, we Like we've been encouraging them to listen back to their sound. It's not for us, it's for you.
Yeah.
You know, and I think maybe that's been a factor. I don't really know, but I think it helps.
And maybe it could be good to explain kind of what we did for the in-person rehearsal too, just to give some context. I mean, we're one of the few people that have the ability to do that, and it's like, right. I mean, in a sense, it feels questionable, and I mean, it's hard to not feel irresponsible for doing something like that. But you know, the way we set it up was we got there, I think, roughly around 40 minutes to an hour early between the three of us that were teaching, and we like outlined in chalk everyone's spot and made sure it was all about 6 feet or more apart, and just did the classic basses, slight arc, tenor, snares were like, and the snares were, I think, were more than 6 feet. I think they were just parked on the parking spaces.
Right.
Which is probably more like 7 feet or something, 7.5 feet, but it's not more. But yeah, and our bass tech, Taylor Ann, brought like 3 individual things of hand sanitizer. Kids all had their drums at home. They're required to fill out a spreadsheet of symptoms, and if they clean their drum, like what's the temperature, so that there's, you know, records of that stuff for the state if necessary, or the public school system. But otherwise, you know, it was great because it turned out being like what an ideal rehearsal should be.
Yeah.
And it's like practicing, which is great, what that is. You know, I think everyone got there in time to, you know, get their drums out of their boxes, or their cases, I should say, set them up in the correct place, get locked in. They get there early. We could do a little flam jam to start because we have like a couple minutes there. And then they do the thing for an hour, get some legatos done. They go home, they clean their drums, make sure they mark down on the spreadsheet that they cleaned their drums, had like clean rehearsal clothes, all that stuff. So it was really, I mean, it truly is quite an ordeal to get that all to go together. But what I liked about it is that it felt more like a team to me. It felt more like there's a lot of effort being put into this. Everyone has a lot of energy being put towards this, which is easier, maybe not easier during this time. Do the amount of free time. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's literally harder. I mean, it's definitely not the best feeling time for me personally. So I can't imagine it's better for students.
You have to do so much together just to get ready for it. I think that maybe that was something. Maybe that's what you're alluding to. I mean, it's not like just like, okay, we're going to show up and now I got to feel like I'm in a team. It's like, no, we've already been working together. We're working off the same spreadsheet, which is going to change now. You know, we've all got to be, in order to make this hour work, this 1 hour a week, whatever we're doing, like we got to be in this way before the hour starts.
Yes. Days before.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. That really made the hour just more effective, and everybody just felt good. Nobody really complained about that process. You know, it's just, I mean, I guess it's a way of life now. So we're used to it. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I know a lot of people that would complain.
Yeah.
And it's just, it was super positive. And we've only done one of them, so here's to next Sunday.
Yeah. I mean, I know I was definitely excited for it. You know, I was amped. Like we're both getting drums so we can distance and play our neat little Yamaha custom drums.
Thanks to Steven Christensen with Paradigm. I got a black cherry fade Yamaha.
Also, Fork's drum closet.
Yes,
I think it's where the MCM guy works. I forget his name every time. There's like a Music City drum corps or ex guy. That was the guy that I was talking to on the phone. But what? Oh yeah, it's the guy from the Mic'd Up video as well. I didn't talk to him, but he also was part of that operation.
Yeah, I forget his name too.
Ben Luck. I've never met him, but he seems like a wild fellow. But yeah, so there's a lot going into it, and it felt very organized, and it made me wonder, you know, maybe that's also something that can happen outside of these circumstances just by having a lot of communication. And it also makes me think about the validity of using video stuff in the future. I mean, we've done that with drum corps. I mean, there's always the video assignment thing between camps, and obviously there's a reason for that because of the amount of time between, or maybe you just have a culture of posting videos in general. Like some of the like Colin McNutt's groups always have that kind of thing, and a lot of others too. It's not just, but I think I even kind of caught wind of Tom Monk's talking some of his cadets podcasts about how he was feeling about that stuff with Dartmouth. Talking about how they are discussing this is just preparation for the winter. Whatever way that takes form or takes shape. But it seems like he was alluding to, and I don't want to put words in his mouth or anything. I'm sure he has his own thoughts, but it seemed like he was saying that there were aspects to it that he wanted to carry forward, and I could definitely understand that. And I think the accountability thing definitely interests me, and
that's a big word.
The prospect of it also made me curious, and I mentioned this to you and Ricky and Kevin the other day about what if there's just a town-wide thing that just happens year-round where percussionists from all grades can have tiered classes where they can just understand rudimental drumming, and how that applies to everything else. Because we don't quite have that through line that some of the West Coast schools have, that Tom Monk's has with Dartmouth, that King Philip had over there in Massachusetts as well. And it's kind of creating something new out of what's being presented to us.
I think it's, I guess you could frame that as an opportunity. It's as a selling point to, it's like a new playground, I guess. For kids, it's like, okay, we're not just going to have this percussion camp in person. Like, we're going to do this online. Not just because it's more convenient, but it's something different and it's effective. We have so far found it to be effective. I mean, I know for sure that a lot of these kids have gotten better. How long have we been doing it? I guess we started end of April.
Yeah, end of April.
But we haven't done that many sessions. I mean, we went every 2 weeks for the actual online class session. And I think that would be. I never, you brought that up the other day, and that's a great idea. And it may be. I don't want to sound like a business person, but it is possibly a cool selling point. It's like, hey, these guys are doing this online. Like, I could just get my pad, because there's not a lot of, they don't need a lot. It sticks and a pad, and get online and just learn and have, open dialogue, like I was saying earlier. Yeah, it would be cool.
Especially the younger students, they don't quite have, unless they have a drum set at home, they might not really have any outlet to play percussion outside of school, or even really anyone's instrument. They might just completely lose interest.
That's true.
At this time.
That's true. And it also takes care of transportation. I mean, because I know how difficult it is. I know how difficult it was for my mom to get me to things when I was younger. It's the same with sports. Like, music can be just as big of a commitment, if not bigger. Mm-hmm. And you kind of solved that problem. So, that's an interesting idea. I love the thought of that. Now we have to take the thought and put it into action.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I like about what's going on now with the videos, just exactly as it's happening now, is that if we were to apply it to a future season, maybe that is, hypothetically post-COVID or whatever, I could definitely see the validity of doing, maybe previously years we could have done like 2 rehearsals a week in person that were 3 hours. It makes me wonder, like, what happens if we do this process where we have a online rehearsal on Wednesday to start things off, and then we have a video assignment leading into the next week that's in person or something, or maybe they post videos for the Monday, and then we go on and off. 1 week we're in person, 1 week we're not in person, to kind of instill that there's still this accountability. Like, if this isn't up to par, like, we're going to see it in person as well.
Right. It's like a checkpoint kind of thing.
Yeah. But there's got to be some ways to make that happen, because it does feel positive. And I can't discount the fact that there's still, the circumstances allow for more buy-in to videos in general, because it's just what we have. It's what we have to work with.
Very
There's no other real option, especially for the past few months. So it's like you either buy in or you just quit.
Yeah.
Very straight ahead way of looking at it, I suppose. But
and recording thing is some people find that kind of difficult or nerve-wracking as much as performing for an audience.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we were talking about was with our kids was, just let the tape roll and just have a full-on practice session, and then you can cut out, maybe a rep that you thought was your highest level from that whole roll. Because I think the idea is to sort of forget that the camera's rolling,
Yeah.
and maybe that's, but it still is at the end of the session. So you're still kind of learning to have that, amount of pressure place as you're playing. But I know that was a factor for some of them. Just kind of the nervousness, the slight intimidation maybe of having just, oh man, this is my rep. Like I have to make it good, and maybe it didn't come out as good as they wanted to.
Yeah.
But I think that helps with performing in general, just getting used to it. I mean, that's an at-home tool that can be used to just get your mind, or to get you in the mindset of performing when it does come time to do that. So,
I've noticed with myself too, like I recorded a video the other day for the Spartans Facebook group. We kind of just toss things in there to keep some education going. We've been posting grids lately, and I did flam grid with the just moving accent, like we were talking about at the rehearsal this past Sunday. And I started recording just like single videos. It's like, okay, let me try to play this flam grid as best as I can. Then I thought about like, okay, so this is taking a long time, so I was going to record one video. And instead of doing like one thing and me playing flams, I ended up doing this whole explanation of how mindset and these different exercises can affect one another. And I found that at least for where I'm at, it helped me kind of pay attention to what was actually happening in the moment and truly try to fix myself, because if I don't, then the video just is what it is and I don't get my point across. So like, for example, I played through the grid once and I was just like, okay, like right off the bat, like here's what happens. Like my first flams on the first partials were just all popped, and then I kind of went the opposite direction and then kind of leaned in again.
Right.
It's like, okay, so let me just try it again based off of that. And just made the point, doing it again, and it cleared up. Maybe the flams were a little bit too close in general, but it was much more consistent.
Yeah.
It wasn't all over the place. And it's like, okay, so like, hey, like if you just thought about those tendencies, or if I thought about those tendencies the first time, I wouldn't have had to do that, and it wouldn't have ended up in the video like that.
Sure.
But it did, and it was just like, okay, so here's how that works. And then I was like, okay, so now here's this exercise. It's the classic one. You go the regular flams, popped flams, regular flams, hair toast, dig it, and then back. So I like worked through that, and I was like, okay, like, extremes, work on both sides, how that affects it. So I played the flams rep again. I was just like, okay, now I have to make sure that something happens. And I'm just not thinking too hard, but I have to make sure it happens. And it definitely translated to maybe not as consistent of a rep, but because I was playing the jigadum, I thought about that. It's like, okay, now my flams are just kind of more regularly open, which is good, but there's that caused some inconsistency. So I made a point. It's like, okay, so things are opening up to better flams, I think.
Yeah.
But if I just worked on it all the time, I could make that consistent and bring it all together again.
Yeah, and you were able to identify a lot of that stuff because you were able to listen back to it, right? I mean, afterwards as well.
Yeah, I was able to verify that I wasn't like full of crap. I'll say crap for the podcast.
But you learned how to beat yourself at your own game when you were talking about tendencies, and so you kind of went one end of the spectrum, went to the other end, and then kind of met in the middle.
Yeah.
You learn how to beat yourself at your own game, and that's something that, tying back to the psychological aspect of the activity, what really drew me into teaching was getting people to be able to beat themselves at their own game, being able to be one step ahead of themselves in terms of being able to identify tendencies ahead of time, because you can, right? You just have to be aware of it. And I think that the whole video assignment thing and that process helps you to become aware of them more, right? Because not just listening back, but like you're saying, just that process of letting the camera roll and just self-discovery. And maybe the camera helps you to be more accountable. It's interesting. Yeah.
I also like there's the other idea, I think, along with, being aware and getting the first rep right the first time, which I think is what a lot of people hear.
Yeah.
I think I heard a video of I think it's Mike McIntosh. I'm sure a bunch of people say this, but he was saying, it's like, yeah, my kids at the Cavaliers, no matter what score they get, first reps, I'll have some kid just completely blow up a part. And a lot of it is, it comes down to like, not if you're just blowing up the part all the time, but more so it's like, okay, what do you do the second rep?
Right.
Like, I mean, it's like, it's definitely world class for sure to get things right the first rep, but it's also very world class to blow up, or maybe not blow up, just hit the first time, and then like be like, oh, like my bad, like okay, I know what happened, so I'm going to take this concept, the skill set that I've worked on, maybe think about how I've worked on that, and then apply that here, and boom, second rep is back in.
Do you think? I mean, because that's an open conversation you have to learn how to have with yourself.
Yeah.
What do you? This brings me to ask you: is that something that maybe has been a thing with education, at least in the past, where why is it that students are not able to sort of have that open dialogue with themselves? Why is there this sort of need to get it right the first time? Otherwise, I'm afraid. Like, why? You know what I mean? Is that maybe? Does that tie back to how people have been educated, or does it tie to maybe what they're seeing, which is the final product in a YouTube video of a high achieving group?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's hard to say, because I mean, if we're thinking strictly education, and then we go back to, or not go back, or we just think about, for example, just Eastern cultures and how they approach just general education, and how much more sophisticated it is than it is over here in terms of the demand. Going to summer school all the time, it's totally year round and very constant. And on one end, it can be taken so seriously where it's just like everything must be done right out of the gate, learn it, take the notes, study till your head falls off, and then get into the best college you can and hopefully get to the top of your class kind of thing. Granted, there's still culture there if like, oh, maybe I play volleyball, I just want to focus more on that, but they still will probably hold you to a certain threshold where if you can't keep up with the grades, you're out. But what I found interesting in college, and I've explained this to some people, is that after marching drum corps, after hearing all these things such as like what Mike McIntosh said, the first rep thing, I found that with my gen eds, as a music major, I truly did not care very much about my gen eds. But I did like some of the subjects. I didn't care about what grades I got as long as I got like a C or something.
Right.
But I did like a lot of the information. Like today I'm very interested in just like the pseudoscience of psychology and like Myers-Briggs testing results and how that affects how I can understand myself and other people. Did I get a great grade in that class? No. But I've learned a lot from that class.
Right.
And my biggest example was philosophy. I really like philosophy. But I don't really like just memorizing things and writing down notes and trying to do an open book test entirely on philosophy. When I focus on getting a really great grade, at least in that context, I don't do as well and I don't learn anything because it's like, maybe it's just like this performance anxiety of like, oh, if I don't memorize this, then I'm screwed. But with that class, I treated it as its own like experiment. I basically just gambled with my grade for fun. But yeah, I was just like, okay, so there's all this information. I do generally enjoy it, but I just like sat back and just paid attention and just ignored the idea of a test completely. And when I take the tests, I get like a D. Like a lot of the times, I think I got like a D plus or a C minus in a class. But when I look back on that, I remember a lot more specifics now. Like thinking back to like Allegory of the Cave and the different types of philosophers in general. This is just an intro class, mind you.
Yeah.
And I can think back and recite some of those things, and it makes sense, and I get it. But I took maybe like 3 years of algebra. I took pre-algebra, algebra, and I took another algebra because I wasn't very good at algebra the second time, and I don't know anything still from algebra at all. But I got better grades in that class. I got maybe like a B or a C, or no, sorry, I got a B or an A in some of those classes.
But the long-term benefit isn't really there.
I don't remember anything at all. Right. Truly, nothing.
I forget. Somebody had said something like, the education system it's based on that whole, short-term memory, the RAM, right? The random access memory just being piled in.
Yeah.
And then you take that quiz, you take that exam. All right, got it, cool. But then they had said, maybe it would be better if we transition to an education system that's based on mastery, right? Where you're actually pursuing a goal, you're pursuing a passion, and you are
Like a
invested in it. Yeah, trade. Yeah, and you're invested in it so much that you're driven. You can't get away from it every day. You know, you want to put that time in, and that's something since I've left school that I've been drawn to more. Exactly what you're talking about. So I don't know. There's obviously a lot of benefits to school and the current education system, and I don't want to start bashing any of that, but
Yeah.
I think it's up to you to decide what you're pulling from it in terms of what do you take away from it? How does it help you, or what aspects of, like, for example, college? You know, I feel like I paid for the experience of being a part of the bands, being a part of, you know, I was in vocal groups there, and I networked with a lot of people in music schools. I'm sure you did it at WestCon.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like I paid for. I don't feel that I paid for my GPA. My GPA really wasn't even considered when I got my full-time job. You know? It wasn't.
Yeah.
Like, I know it wasn't. So, yeah, that's we went off the deep end there, but.
Like, it also depends on who you are, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're just a very logic-oriented person, then maybe just this cramming idea is perfect for you, and it might be perfect for you. But, you know, my example is definitely on the far end of the spectrum, where it's just like I was just toying with my grades just out of curiosity, out of
I love that.
my own philosophical ideas about education inside of a philosophy class. But
what did you say? Uncover your butt.
But something to be said in relation to that and drum corps is that, you know, to do drum corps, you kind of have to turn a lot of your brain off and go primal to do a lot of things that are being asked of you. I mean, you're just going. I mean, to process all this information, you know, to not overthink is certainly a skill.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen a lot of people in auditions just that are extremely smart, smarter than probably smarter than people I've met anywhere else in my life. That kind of fold under the pressure just because there's a lot of things going on up there. Yeah. And if you can't just shut it off, it can cause a lot of conflict.
Sure. Even physically, I always talk about what can you disengage physically in the technique. There's typically more engaged than there needs to be. And the mindset thing you just brought up, it reminds me of our friend Omi Batan. He was always very good at communicating how to think about the information that's being delivered for the students. And that's definitely a fact. How do you process all of that and at the same time learn to remove information as it sort of builds upon itself, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to help them to dissect it, to digest it, I should say, you know, one by one, and level it off and help them see how it all not only connects, relates, but builds upon itself. That's interesting.
And staying present too. Like I was talking to Andy Kim about that. It's just like, if you can't stay present, then you're just thinking about, I want this to be over. I want to go home.
Right.
Beep, beep, boo, boo. That was definitely me a lot of the time. I guess a ton of factors. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff. I mean, do you want to cap this off by talking about some of the technique things we've been exploring the past 4 months?
Yeah, when I got to Newtown, I know you guys, when I say you guys, I mean you and Kevin Thompson had sort of established this thing with the technique that was kind of pulling from, you know, what the Blue Knights were doing. But, you know, I guess I see a lot of that more as being weighted in the writing and the way that music is arranged. And I think that the technique that you're teaching should sort of be derived from that.
Yeah.
I think that the way that things are arranged in something like the Blue Knights or Broken City, in Blue Coats, you know, you can talk about groove-oriented writing or writing that just kind of flows in a more round way. Like, I guess the way I would consider it is you have some groups that are more digital in the way a digital signal runs is like it's kind of box by box, right? It's very square edged. And you can see that like things are just suddenly disrupted. You have, you're up here, you're down here, block, 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 block. And that's cool in its own right. And something that's been happening more in our neck of the woods has been this sort of analog approach where it's very curved, right? The music sort of lends itself to itself, if you will. It's like it's always flowing in and out in a more round way, and I think that the technique has derived from that. And but you and I have been in Taylor, and we've been working to sort of fine tune things, and we've just been learning more from people talking about it. We watched that. You had sent me that link of Taha from Blue Knights.
Oh yeah,
he was talking about how he develops different muscle groups, and he pinpoints each one of them. But like I was telling you, there's no stone left unturned with the physical elements that he's targeting. And I think that was really interesting. Like we've been working on introducing what we call stick yoga to the kids, which kind of is this individual finger development. And we pulled that from Jojo Mayer, who's a drum set player. And he does that, before every show, right? He's working on that stuff, and it's part of his sort of practice regime. And there's different ways to do that. You can have the hand being more of a French grip with, the thumb and forefinger kind of always on, and then you can work the back fingers individually like that, or you can actually move the stick in between the first knuckle on each finger and work them completely isolated, and, without moving the wrist. So that's one tool, just to create awareness of the fingers and finger contact, back finger contact on the stick. And then you can isolate the wrist with something like hand claps, which he does as well. And we kind of always have, we're always encouraging a relaxed arm approach, a relaxed forearm.
Yeah.
As sort of a fluid part of the entire stroke. And, I think initially the conversation was about, well, is the prep stroke a molar thing? Is it a half molar? And I think we've moved away from talking, using that word in general.
Yeah.
It's more of this, relaxed wrist approach. And then we would also, we had discovered the mic'd up flow marching video with Richard Ramos. He was talking about basically the same thing, and he was describing it as a wave that really starts from the elbow, and that made the most sense to me. And the wave is generated with kind of a quick flick at the elbow, and then it, like any wave, a crowd wave, generates through the entire arm and out the fingertips. So you're actually allowing that energy to flow naturally. It's not being caught up anywhere. And I think that bringing awareness to the elbow as a part of the technique is not something that I had ever taught, had ever thought about. And it's not like, well, that's the pendulum, like that's the pivot point. It's more of like just being aware that you kind of need that. You need a flick from that point to be able to generate that relaxed wave through the arm and through the fingertips. And so that's what we've been kind of talking about with, and I think it hit home for some of the kids.
Yeah, it seems like there's so many obvious things that I just never realized. Like, I knew about stick yoga. Stick yoga, and learning that from Ryan Anderson was kind of what ignited my interest and understanding of what was going on out there. And then the whole weight thing was super big at Scouts while I was there. It was kind of just some translations from several different ideologies in one place at that time. But after watching Taha's video and seeing how many variations there were on stick yoga, how many variations there were on isolating the wrist, like the finger on top, tap pyramid, fingers off, tap pyramid, then just regular tap pyramid, different approaches to just playing the stroke types, it filled in like all of the gaps in my broken concrete wall. 'Cause I mean, like, think of just regular stick yoga. When I was at Spartans before all this stuff went crazy, I was looking at Noah Unk's playing. He's on the line there, and he has the pretty trademark kind of like the back fingers kind of come off at times. It happens at Dartmouth. It's fine. And I was like, hey man, I want you to put the back fingers on the stick, but to do that, if you were to actually just, not that he couldn't just do it right away, but if you want to just build more understanding of that, if you just do stick yoga, just moving fulcrum or whatever, just to kind of exercise what that feels like, especially just side of regular rebound strokes, kind of just macro motions. If I tell you, can you put the back fingers on the stick, it's not just this arbitrary thing where you just try to do it and then it kind of comes back. It's just like, oh, like I can actually feel what it's like to have my fingers back there, and I can kind of implement that. And then there's the stationary fulcrum where you can kind of get some more micro motions and the twitch going.
Right.
And then the front of the grip, back of the grip switch. That was incredible, just to like give you the holistic understanding of the whole grip. And I'm thinking about young players, talk about getting, these middle school kids to understand their hands. It's like, what better way to do that? And it's
right.
It seems like it should have been the answer all along.
Yeah.
And it's like we're just expecting kids to just have their hands work. And it's like, no, if you just really exercise them, figure out how they work at a young age, then you're well more equipped to figure it out.
Talking about just letting them explore more, and we do less talking, and there have been plenty of occasions where you and I run our mouths and we're like, okay, we're doing too much talking. We need to just let them kind of figure things out. So give them an exercise, or give them an exercise that they can just kind of run with, and it works those points that you're talking about and technique. I think the tricky part is how, when you isolate each thing like that, then how do you get it to connect? In one fluid stroke, because we always talk about the balance. It's a balance between your fingers and your wrist and your forearm. And it's like, well, how? What's the balance? What's the ratio? What's the order of operations happening there? So that is, it's continues to be a challenge. I think I like kind of what you've been saying, which is lead from the fulcrum. And I'm sure maybe you pulled that from somebody else. I'm not sure, but
from Veronica Wicks.
Awesome. Yes.
Also, the University of North Alabama podcast.
Okay, cool. That for me was okay. Like when you mentioned that, I was like, well, that's something that connects things in my brain, as far as trying to explain it to other people. But I was also reading, and I told you about this. John Lamb, who's a drummer, and he's also a biologist. He's an expert in anatomy. He has this book out called The Anatomy of Drumming. And one of the things that he talks about in a section of the book was the idea of kinesthesia. And that is basically the sense that nobody really has talked about before, right? We talk about sight, smell, taste, feel. But kinesthesia is a word that really connects a lot of these things. So it's really, you're thinking about how you want the movement to feel. That's kind of how he defines it. And to me, that opened a lot of doors, because you're not thinking specifically about, well, how does this feel currently? Okay. How do I look? Okay. It's really a way to connect those two things, as well as connect it to the phrase of music that you're playing. So it's something that I kind of just recently discovered. I was during COVID, and I was actually in the hospital for surgery. But there's more to kind of research on that. But yeah, the idea of kinesthetics as sort of the sixth sense that nobody talks about, that kind of inspired me too.
Yeah, and it's like the whole feel thing, just focusing on how everything sounds. I mean, we just talked about, I've been taught for sure to keep the fulcrums on the American flag. Kind of started to see how flawed that mentality is, just because everyone's hands are different. So the way that the weight distributed on the stick is in with the hand is completely different. Defining like where your thumb should be when everyone's thumb size is different alone is totally flawed. But I mean, if you just shift that up ever so slightly and just let people explore what actually works the most efficiently for them, just in maybe just a given area, then it's like, it just makes everything so much simpler in terms of efficiency of the stroke.
Absolutely. And I wonder if it's less flawed than it is. Maybe I think that whole concept with Vic Firth, obviously, too, with the flag location, comes from maybe a pre-marching or something that was outside the marching world, like drum set concert. And I think in that environment, it can work. I mean, I know when I play drum set, I'm choked way back. You're holding. So I think it depends on what sticks you're holding and what you're being asked to do. But I think for our purposes, it makes a little more sense to shift up a little bit. And you also have to think about, well, where really is the fulcrum? I mean, is it really between the thumb and the index finger? Probably not. It's a little bit further back. At least what we've been kind of exploring, right? I mean, you feel like you have more control and you're more relaxed when you think more about the back of the hand, and maybe the fulcrum is centered, to the thumb and middle finger. So that would maybe locate you back at the flag.
Right. Oh yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah. It's an interesting conversation.
I mean, otherwise, I really like the lead with the fulcrum thing. And what's wild about that is just because, we've just been trying to interpret what's been happening on the West Coast. And, I haven't had the luxury of being taught by the people over there. So it's, other than just Ryan Anderson from Pulse, and, he's at Blue Coats right now. But just extensive teaching, years in there. Haven't gotten that. So, we described their lead from the fulcrum thing as like this parallel thing that happens, and like we would get it to happen, but maybe not just quite as efficiently. Right. So it was like this confusion of like, okay, is this molar or lead with the bead? But it's just, if you focus on just lifting your arm in this wave-like motion, and just as opposed to lead with the bead or the wrist, lead with the fulcrum.
Yeah.
Then it makes that happen automatically. It's just like, oh.
And then it's like, well, what happens when the tempo gets cranked, right? It's like, well, if you're talking about leading from the fulcrum, then maybe that makes more sense no matter what tempo you're at. Right? Yeah. And I know, because I'll never forget this. This is before Dan Shack was doing all this stuff that he's doing with flow marching now. It was one of his earlier videos where he was kind of talking about Carolina Crowns technique. And he had mentioned the metaphor of a thermometer, where things are going to sort of dial slightly depending on the tempo that you're playing, the height that you're playing at. And there's still a healthy balance between the different elements that we're talking about in the technique, but it's going to dial just slightly in and out depending on what what the phrase is and what the tempo is. And I was like, well, that's a really good metaphor to use, because that is what's happening. It's not one extreme or the other. We're not really turning things off and all of a sudden engaging this thing. It's like, it's all still balanced, but we're just pushing and pulling slightly on where the focal point is.
Yeah. The same kind of deal with like maintaining grip shape and not getting too wild with that.
Right.
There's also the idea like just using whatever technique works for the specific part of the music you're using. Like I think at 7th we were doing this a little bit where, we had our technique where it was just kind of our understanding so far of this Mike Jackson type thing. But, we would have kind of some of the big roles in there that, Kevin was learning at cadets with Colin. And we was like, all right, guys, so we're just have these big roles. We're not going to play them like we're playing roles on our other passages. We're going to play them how they're taught to be played. So we just taught exactly what Colin McNutt teaches for those roles.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, we're super fast. It's like, okay, guys, techniques are not all going to be this big floaty arm thing. We got to dial in with the wrists a little bit and kind of get in there. But there's obviously this overall thing that we prescribe to as well.
Yeah. What I like about where the direction that it's going in the technique is you're seeing it sort of blend. I mean, I'm a percussionist in the concert realm, drum set, jazz, whatever. And to me, it's blending these different areas of percussion together more, because I think previously, when I marched, it just seemed like it was so separate. Like I would go into my studio lesson and have to completely kind of change my mindset and be like, okay, this isn't marching. I need to turn off this sort of rigid rudimental approach and be more relaxed and kind of play, what's in the style and the approach that she wanted me to play in. And now it's, to me at least, it's sort of starting to blend these things together, where you're not having to separate it so much because it just makes sense. It's just, here's a natural approach. It's allowing the stick to breathe. It's allowing your body to breathe and everything to resonate. I always think back to Evelyn Glennie. She's a deaf musician, percussionist, and and she uses her body as a resonating chamber. Because she literally can't hear, but she can hear through her body, and she's a concert percussionist, right? So
yeah,
all these things that we're talking about in the marching world, it's connecting to the concert world, and it's making more versatile musicians, I think.
Yeah. And what I think is great, after learning about this weight thing from like Derek Fields and James Sparling and Lee and Ryan, I got back to college after that, and we had some artists. We had like the Yamaha Day of Percussion, so Ian was there, of course, or Wonica, and kind of handling some of that stuff. But Pius Chung came in, and he was explaining this weight concept, the same thing that I learned at Scouts verbatim for the marimba.
That, right?
Yeah, because it was just like, I want to play really big, loud notes, and I don't want to crack my bars.
Right.
So you know how you do that, guys. Don't force your hand through the bars. Use the weight of your arm. He was the first person that told me, he's just like, yeah, guys, like, your arm weighs like 8 pounds. That's like a bowling ball. Can you imagine dropping a bowling ball on your foot? It doesn't feel good. No.
Right.
But if you take that and just let it resonate into your arm, and you hit the low end of the marimba with that kind of resonance, it transfers all that harsh energy and opens up the sound, opens up the sound of the bars, lets everything smooth out, and then you don't have your cracked bars or your Zivkovich cracked bars.
Right.
But
it allows your body to be more of a shock absorber naturally.
Yeah.
You think about dropping a car from high up, got shocks, right, to help with that. And if you're tight anywhere and you're restricting that, it's not obviously not good physically. So I think thinking about weight is something we talk about all the time. I probably overuse the word, but it helps you to keep things relaxed and have these natural shock absorbing areas of your body do what they should.
Yeah.
It allows the energy to sort of dissipate in a natural way. That's obviously reducing injury, but you're also just getting a more musical sound. Like, you're getting better sound quality as a result. We always talk about sound quality. How do you do that? Well, there you go. So, but the challenge is obviously communicating this to each and every student. And I was telling you about this, but it's like, maybe it was Paul Nalesnik. I forget. Talking about how it's teaching is like being a doctor. Every student has a different diagnosis. They're going to process information differently, and you have to sort of find ways to get it across and tailor it to each student. So it's always a challenge, but man, I love the journey, and I know you do too.
I'll put one more story in there into the pool before we hit 2 hours.
Has it been that long already? Holy crap.
Like a minute 48, or 49. But when Kevin Thompson was at Hart School of Music, studying with Ben Toth, Ben had drum corps students in the past. I think he had Ian's sister, Vanessa Whitaker, and I think several other people. And I don't think he was very super about his kids doing drum corps, but I think he had a realization with Kevin, one of his lessons, and maybe I'm wrong, Kevin can correct me, but where he was just starting to make the connection between how probably especially Kevin's experiences with cadets transferred to his marimba playing.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily in terms of like formality, technique necessarily, note to note, but with just general approach to an instrument. And I think Kevin was explaining this resonance idea, which is, especially for East Coast and being a teacher in the East Coast and concert percussion, he's probably come across a lot of people that like to force things and play to the bottom head, as they say, which definitely rubs people the wrong way.
Yes.
And concert percussion.
Brendan Mason was talking about that.
Yeah. So it's like then someone finally comes along that's done the snare drumming thing. A lot of his drum corps students were probably in front ensemble, more specifically. And coming from that mindset, and it was just like, I think Ben was just like, oh, that's cool. Sounds good. Keep doing it.
Yeah. There's this, there's this appreciation happening. I mean, maybe not just from a technique standpoint, but I know, Damon Grant was talking with Robert Van Cise, and he was,
cool.
and Van Cise was talking about how he had seen a drum corps battery warming up at I think it was a PASIC, and he was blown away. And so there's this new appreciation happening cross-platform, and it's really cool to see. I mean, even when I was a student at UConn in the percussion studio, my first person I studied under was Haruka Fuji, and she was a master marimbist. She had ties with Kiko Abe.
Okay.
I want to say part of the family out there, but she, was never. I think she made one comment like, "Hey, you could probably chill out." We were playing Buster Bailey's Wrist Twisters. I don't know if you've ever.
Oh yeah.
I was working through that book, but other than that, it was. There was definitely a recognition for the value that the marching activity brings, and obviously vice versa. It's all music, man, and it's happening, and it's great.
Yeah, I watched some of those Van Cise ensembles and kind of like watch some of the members of the YPG group with that drum corps stuff in mind. Like Matt Cowan is there. They just put out a video of Raintree. I think like last week. It might have been a repost, but I think it was recent.
Okay.
And then I think it was Jeff that was in there before. He was in some cadets lines.
Yeah.
I think he was the guy that fell in 2009.
Oh no.
I don't know. But yeah, he was gnarly.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see their touch to things and see if it differs at all. And I definitely try to pay more attention to them at times. But
yeah, and like Matt Howard with the LA Philharmonic, he's been putting out just videos of himself chopping out to electric wheelchair and all kinds
I've seen those.
Yeah, he's just he's loving it, and it's just cool to see again that cross-platform thing. And yeah, the Yale guys are crazy. I saw with Hartford Symphony Van Cise's group there. That was cool.
Was that when Doug Perry was still on there?
Yep, he played with them. This was kind of recent. I think it was. Yeah, it might have been like 6 months ago or something. It was fantastic, just the presence they have on stage, and just the fact that they truly enjoy what they're doing, and you can see that. It's an authentic joy that they're putting out there, and I think that's their whole thing. But even in drum corps, even in the marching activity, that's something that I think we can emphasize too for them. Of course, the drumline has always had that stigma of like, well, we got to be serious, stone cold face. But I think that's changing. The more theatrical it gets, especially with indoor and indoor coming outdoor. We talk about it all the time, but the performance aspect is something that's ever evolving, and I think it's getting more and more fun to watch.
Yeah, I do like that. The YPG people. Yeah, I've had. Doug Perry was one of my teachers in college, and I had a couple kind of group ensemble lessons with Johnny Allen. But those were just so... It opened up a lot of my interpretation of concert percussion because, Van Cise was definitely a very strict fellow, but a lot of those students are still very... they can be very flamboyant, very outgoing, they're very fluid. Like, I think... Doug was telling me one time about Johnny, and how Johnny he was also just kind of like a freak of nature. Like he would talk about how he'd like, oh yeah, I went on a walk this morning for like an hour, and it was like, how do you have time for that? What are you doing? But he was teaching us drumming by Steve Reich, the bongo part. Both of them were, and it just made it so fun the way they explained how they were performing it in Ghana, and how people perceive that music in Ghana. And it's probably one of the most fun experiences I ever had playing percussion in my life was playing drumming.
Do you think that there's an element of not taking things too seriously when it comes to that? Like, is that maybe part of how you can enjoy what you're doing and then also, let that be infectious to people that you're working with?
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah. We were talking to the kids about that too. Like, I remember the first session we had, the first virtual session we did, it was like, we were talking about the idea of practicing, and I had referenced Carter McLean quote from his book that he put out about how practice is like a moving target. That he has to kind of find and hit every day. And you had brought up, you're not always going to be all about it, like plain and simple. And it's just sort of finding those moments when you are and playing off of that, kind of riding that wave. But respecting the fact that it's, you can't take it too seriously to the point where it becomes, what do I want to say, work? It just has to be something that you're so overjoyed about when you do it, you kind of can't get away from it. And maybe that's kind of what you're alluding to with those groups and those experiences that you've had. Maybe it's a result of that, where they kind of figured out how to maybe relax and not take things too seriously, but also just be really passionate, remain passionate about it.
Yeah, it's like accepting the process. It's like,
right.
I think what I was telling kids too is just like, once you get to a certain point, you could be the biggest person in the world at something, but you're still going to have days where you're just not liking what you're doing. You might even want to quit what you're doing altogether. I mean, musical artists, they just write a bunch of terrible songs, and a lot of times they just write a lot of them, and then they just kind of just get one. It's like, all right, this is awesome. And sometimes you look at their discography of your favorite artist, and you realize they might have really only had 3 good songs in their career that took off, and that's the only reason why they're relevant. But they still have this catalog, and you get to know them, and you just get interested in who they are and what they have to say and what they sound like. I think about Eminem's after like all the stuff that he's been putting out that I just truly do not like. I look back at his catalog, it's just like, how many of the songs that he made did I actually like? This is a whole other tangent, but
I don't go for it.
He made like 3 or 4 songs that I was really
and even in performance mode, like, we talk about Hendrix, like he was not about his playing every night when he got on stage.
No.
To the point where like sometimes he gets so pissed off he'd light his guitar on fire or whatever, and it's like that's a thing. Obviously he had some manic issues, but that's a valid thing, and I think being able to accept that and again have open conversation, I guess that's the theme of the night. I don't know. But,
accept the process.
Yeah,
J. Cole said, or something like, it's like, you'll get to where I am, and it'll be like, wow, I still hate my life.
Look where I am, but don't look where I am.
Yeah, that was pretty powerful. I saw that early on in college. You're just on stage, it's like, yeah, guys, like I'm sitting in front of you all right now, and I have all this fame and all this power in front of you, but I still hate my life. He like said that, and it was just like, wow. And then suddenly, like Gary Vee and Ty Lopez do make sense to a degree. It's just like, you just got to enjoy what you do and enjoy the process. It takes a long time. Don't hate yourself along the way, or else you'll end up hating it.
Yeah,
you hate what you like to do.
I had a similar thing when like Billy Joel came to UConn and did a Q&A, and he was talking about how he went through like a depressive episode. This is after he got big, and he was like drinking Lysol, like kind of killing himself. It was like, I'm sitting there thinking, how could you get to that level when you have everything you can imagine? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And but there you go. There you have it. It's like, it's not all rainbows and butterflies, I guess.
Well, so we almost hit exactly the 2-hour mark. So we have 30 seconds here, I think, to wrap up. I have to go write a ballad in about 30 seconds. So
have fun with that. Well, now you're all warmed up.
Yeah, I'm all warmed up on my marching thoughts. But thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
So I guess I'll see you tomorrow on a online call.
Pretty much. See you in 24. Later, man.
All right. See you, Tyler.